Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the third in our series of urban design town halls from AIA California. I'm Rona Rothenberg, AIA California's Vice President of Government Relations. Before I introduce our moderator, Adrianne Steichen, AIA, just a few housekeeping items. Today's session is being recorded. It will be available both on AIA California's website and our YouTube channel shortly after the event. The discussion qualifies for AIA learning units. For members that stay for the duration, we'll submit you for AIA credit. They should appear in your transcript within 2 weeks. Following the short presentations by each of our exceptional panelists, we'll open the floor for questions. Please use the Q&A feature. You may also raise your hand if you want to speak directly in the participant pull-up menu. Now, on to the town hall. In the wake of COVID-19 pandemic, is today's stark reality a dramatic shift from commercial office space to shelter at home, live-work paradigms. With many companies hedging and slow to reopening, they've encouraged their educated workforce to telecommute from home, leaving office buildings abandoned and unoccupied. Many of the workers have successfully adapted to balancing the challenges of work and family life, as you know. The irony when a home doesn't necessarily have to be tied to a workplace, a location, the 3 decades old jobs housing imbalance overnight has ended in empty offices. Let's learn how live work, both as a technical term and as a feature of today's reality, will permanently transform our physical and urban and suburban communities. Our moderator, welcome Adrianne Steichen, AIA. Adrianne is a principal at FAIA and brings 20 years of experience in student and multifamily residential developments, leading several large urban housing projects in San Francisco, Oakland, and the East Bay. Since 2001, Adrianne has been an active member of the AIA, having served in various capacities locally, at the state level, and nationally, and most recently as the 2020 president of the San Francisco chapter. She has served on juries of National Housing, AIA HUD Secretary Housing Awards, ACSA, AIA Housing Design Education Award, Bank of America Low Income Housing Challenge, and AIA Minnesota's Affordable Housing Design Awards. She's presented on the subject of urban housing at the American Planning Association National and AIA California conferences throughout the Bay Area with SPUR, San Francisco, and the Nonprofit Housing Association of Northern California. She's a licensed architect in California and Oregon, a LEED accredited professional, a building design and construction and homes, and holds a Master of Architecture degree from Tulane with a minor in film studies. In 2015, Adrianne was nationally recognized as a Young Architect of the Year. Welcome, Adrianne, and I look forward to the talk.
Thanks, Rona. So first, let me introduce each of our panelists. I'll also give a brief introduction before the presentation begins. Our first presenter will be Tom Dolan. Tom has worked at or near his home in Oakland for much of the last 27 years. His comprehensive book, Live, Work, Planning and Design, Zero Commute Housing, published in 2012, is the summation of his work and of the subject of live work to date. The book rigorously defines the different types of live work in an effort to help developers, regulators, and designers avoid reinventing the wheel each time live work comes to a new city. Tom Dolan served until recently on the advisory board of Art House in San Francisco. Through his involvement there, he stayed in close touch with the live work controversy in the San Francisco Planning Department, which became a valuable case study in his book. His efforts to help colleagues and others to understand live work will doubtless lead to further publications in the near future. Tom Dolan is a charter member of the Congress for New Urbanism and is CNU accredited. He's a licensed architect in the state of California. After Tom, we'll hear from Geoff Morgan. As president and CEO, Geoff oversees all operations of First Community Housing, serving over 3,000 residents with the highest quality of environmentally sustainable, service-enriched, affordable housing. Prior to First Community Housing, Geoffrey was the Vice President of Real Estate Development for Christian Church Homes and was responsible for the development of various phases of approximately 2,000 units of senior housing and mixed-use projects nationally. He has over 20 years experience in overseeing all aspects of financing, development, construction, and operation of affordable housing projects, subdivision home building, commercial real estate development, agricultural land trust, historic renovation, and military base reuse. Geoff is a graduate of MIT with a Master's of Real Estate Development and a licensed general contractor and lead AP Homes. Following Geoff, we'll hear from Rick Abramson. Rick Abramson, FAIA, led his design firm Workplace Studio Architecture until 2019 when he joined the city of West Hollywood in the role of city architect and helped establish its new urban design and architecture studio. A former Fulbright scholar to Italy, Rick has taught at universities for 18 years. He served a 3-year term representing California on the AIA's National Strategic Council, led professional and built environment legislative efforts resulting in 2 bills signed by Governor Brown, and is currently serving as the chair of AIA California's Housing Congress, exploring design-inspired solutions to the state's housing challenges. Then we'll hear from Jonathan Segal. Jonathan Segal, FAIA and Development Company, has been awarded 6 national AIA honor awards for their housing work. They've been responsible for the design and development of over 300 medium to high density urban, residential, mixed use, and live work units, totaling over 300,000 square feet of construction. Segal is considered one of San Diego, California's most successful and pioneering residential architecture development companies, and has a reputation for providing superior housing at a lower cost than comparable properties. Their focus is exclusively on urban projects ranging from 80 to 160 dwelling units per acre. Segal has been the recipient of numerous accolades, including 40 local, state, and national AIA awards for residential and urban design. Over the past 20 years, Segal has created and modeled the unique practice of architect as developer, a prototype in which the architect has the ability to become the owner, therefore eliminating the client and the general contractor from the design and building process. Segal teaches this concept of architect as developer in an online video course for architects. Jonathan Segal, FAIA, is also able to serve as an expert witness for development disputes, construction defect litigation, and condemnation law. So finally, I will be making some closing presentation remarks, and then we'll open up for questions. So to start us off, with the COVID-19 pandemic, many of us have been forced to work from home. But even prior to the pandemic, there has been a pent-up demand for telecommuting and working from home. Live work has been a California aspiration for at least 2 decades, but often the live work model has run afoul of building codes and planning and zoning ordinances, government red tape, and hasn't been able to keep pace with the competing demands of professional career and family life. Most recently, Oakland's ghost ship fire disaster took the lives of artists and musicians living in a communal warehouse space where both building inspection and zoning compliance fell short of acknowledging the acute need for economical live work artist space. The failure at Ghost Ship is that low-income residents evicted from warehouse lofts couldn't find reasonably priced live work space and were forced underground to band together in unsafe collaborative living and working conditions. The other extreme live work model has been Silicon Valley high-tech startups, where tech entrepreneurs poached valuable housing stock, driving up rental housing prices, creating affordable housing shortages, and forcing middle-income families to compete against venture capital for modest homes. Until recently, very few took live work seriously. However, today, in the wake of the COVID pandemic, comes today's stark reality and a dramatic shift from commercial office space to the shelter-at-home live work paradigm. With many companies hedging and slow to reopen, they've encouraged their white-collar and high-tech workforce to telecommute from home, leaving offices abandoned and vacant. And many of these workers have successfully adapted to balancing the challenges of work and family life. So how will live work or work-live permanently transform our physical urban and suburban communities as commercial office buildings complexes remain unoccupied, downtown brick and mortar merchants and dine-in restaurants compete with online retailers and to-go dining, schools and colleges navigate the challenges of in-classroom instruction and remote telelearning, and reduced public transit ridership and increased single occupant vehicles, can they coexist? So will live work or work-live become an economic phoenix or extinguish the California dream? And so the notion of live work and work-live in some of its varieties and permutations will be explored this morning with our panelists. And so with that, we'll get started. Tom, thank you.
Good morning. Hello, California. Yes, certainly the picture around live work has changed a lot in the last 9 months, and many more of us are working at home. And I'm going to give you a basic primer on live work types, starting with the next slide. Next. So this is the basic definition. If you live where you work, you're doing live work. And there are many forms of live work, which I will get to next. But first, a little history. Next. Different parts of the country have described live work in different ways. The new urbanists in the Southeast describe live work as a type, a building type. And out here, we think of it as a hybrid land use type. And I'm going to go on to talk about that next. Many existing buildings, next, have been converted to live work, as you know. Here are a few of them in the Bay Area. A former school, former school, former Italian social club, and former armory. Next. Next. Two basic technological advances in our society have given rise to live work and have allowed live work to happen. The first is the adoption of shipping containers, which happened starting in about the 1960s. And what happened is many warehouses became vacant and available. And the first people to step in were artists. Next. In places like Tribeca, in Soho, in New York. Next. And here in Oakland. The other technological advance, of course, was the rise of the internet. And that has given rise to new construction live work buildings around the country, such as next in San Francisco, where it became kind of a planning disaster. Next, Washington, D.C., next, and Prospect, Colorado.
Whoa.
Next. The biggest downside, next, of live work is isolation, as many of you are discovering working at home now. And how do we deal with isolation? Best way to deal with it is to provide opportunities for interaction. Next. Somebody say something? Please mute yourself. The best way we can relate to the problem with isolation is to design to facilitate interaction. And there are two ways to do that. One, locate the project on a great street, such as on the upper right here in Florida, and lower left, and in the lower right in a couple of projects of mine. But the main thing is we need to address the issue of isolation. And it really comes down to urban design. It comes down to how we think about our cities. We have done projects, which you'll see, which provide for isolation interaction within the project, courtyard live work. And then we also have done projects and recommend projects to be on great streets. Next. So now I'm going to go through some terms. Live work use intensities include, next, work live, live work, and home occupation. These are all different intensities of work, starting with the most intense, which is work live. Next. Next. In work live, really the work activity dominates. Next. In live work, the dominance will shift over time, and live work units, such as you see on the upper left, or the entire top of this page, those are live work units. Next. And home occupation is basically, as the name implies, working at home. And some people don't think home occupation is live work. It is. It's probably the most common type right now. Most people working at home are doing what we call home occupation. Next. Physically, there are three different types of units, proximity types. Live with, next, 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 next. Up, go back one. Sorry. So live with is the most common type of live work unit. And it's essentially a large working area with oftentimes a bedroom and a mezzanine above. It's the most flexible. Sorry, I got a phone call. Okay, next. Live near is next, 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 next. Oops, back one. Sorry. Good. A live near unit is for somebody who wants a little bit of separation between their living and their working. And it typically is either a wall or a floor separating the living and the working portions. In the case of the illustration here, this is a place where you can enter at the street and go straight up to the work area, or you can enter off the street or straight up to the live area portion, or you can enter directly into the work portion. Next. Good, great, good work. Live nearby is essentially a form of live work in which you leave your unit and you go to some other unit or space. What I've illustrated here is a separate studio, maybe in a former garage. Housing over retail is certainly one form of live work. Live nearby, excuse me. Next. So now I'm going to talk about project types. Warehouse conversion, such as the one on the upper left, which is a building I lived in Tribeca a long time ago, 45 years ago. Home office, next. Next. Go back, sorry, I don't know what happened. Oh, okay. In the second from the left, illustrated is home occupation or home office. Townhouse, flex house, such as you see in the second from the right on the top, and courtyard, live work courtyard housing. And then the urban loft complex is such as you'd see on the left there in San Francisco. Next. We've developed, and other people have certainly developed, a building type called a flex house, in which on the left-hand side of the drawing is essentially our 4 units built as townhouses with work downstairs and living upstairs. And then as retail matures, these buildings can flex into retail downstairs and live work upstairs. Next. Courtyard community is a type that we more or less invented in the mid-1980s. And the most important part about a courtyard community is, in fact, the courtyard. It's the place where people interact as they come and go. And it's a fairly high density type, 30 dwelling units per acre. It may or may not have a street presence. Hopefully it does. This is Filbert Court on the upper left, and Ocean View Lofts on the upper right, and South Prescott Village on the lower right. Next. The first new construction live work ever built in the United States was South Prescott Village, which we designed in the mid-1980s. And it's the intention of it is that it is very much a courtyard project. There's 16 units. It mainly was occupied by artists for the first 20 years of its existence. Next. And it really is a community. When the client came to me, he said, well, what if we just build these 4 barracks-like buildings and just sort of have entrances off that? And I said to him, well, what if we wrap the buildings around each other and make courtyards and a garden? And in fact, that's what we did. We did two 25-foot wide courtyards. You can see on the lower left here the shape of the courtyards in the middle of the buildings and the garden in between. And it's really about the magic that happens when communities really work. Next. Here you can see the entry sequence. You come in through a breezeway, courtyard, all the units enter off the courtyard, then you continue onto the garden, and then onto the courtyard on the other, that is accessed from the other side. The project is on 2 streets. Next. This is where the interaction happens, in the courtyards and in the gardens. And serendipitous encounters and casual interactions are really the gold here. That's what we're really looking for, and to make it really a place that's more than the sum of the number of units. Next. Unit design. There are 2 kind of axioms here: light, space, and access. In this case, access for large works of art to be brought in and out. And then what we find is that live work tenants and owners really want to add their own identity to their spaces. So what we try to do is not spend a lot of money on fancy finishes and just create great spaces. Painted plywood floors, porcelain keyless light fixtures. And if people want to add a hardwood floor on the left, they can do that, but we're not going to spend their money for them and make that decision. Next. Missing middle is a concept that has been popularized by Dan Perolic at Opticos Design in Berkeley, and the basic idea is missing middle buildings are in between large apartment buildings and single family houses. That portion of housing that is very flexible and that is something that we need more of in the future. This is where I live and work, and my office is now in the live near on the upper left. It has been elsewhere in the building, like upstairs in the picture. And this is a 6,000 square foot site in which we've managed to sort of pack in a lot of activity and a lot of living and working. Next. These are some other shots of the place. Great room, porch. Go ahead. Next. Garden house, shed working garden house, home office where I'm sitting right now. Next. And Ocean View Lofts is another courtyard project, which is very contextual. Many people look at that upper left picture and say, gee, that's been there a long time, right? No, it was built in 1993. And next, good. The project is built around a courtyard with a rather special fountain, and the parking is off the street. And you notice I'm not really showing the units because they're in some ways the least important part of courtyard design. Next. Village Well Communities is an idea I've come up with recently. This is a place where I lived and worked for many years, 17 years. Got my start and really where I learned how courtyards work. It's a magical place, and there's going to be more of that in the future. In fact, right now I'm working on a pocket neighborhood based on this idea, Ross Chapin's idea. Next. This is a larger project we worked on, which is a live-work community or live-work neighborhood. Included in this, if you look at the upper right picture, the colonnaded structures are flex houses that are liners that shield the parking, and above is courtyard housing. This project unfortunately didn't get built because it hit the market at the boom time, or the bust time. But anyway, go on. Next. So review. Next. Multiple project types. Next. Flexible unit types. Next. Interactive spaces, most important thing. Next. And community. Next. So this is the book I wrote, which came out in 2012. And it is a very useful book. It really covers all of what I've shown in this slideshow and much, much more. There's a model live work building code, model live work planning code, and lots of resources in it. And but not only that, my website, go on, next, contains a lot of the information that's in this slideshow. And next, I'm available, of course, for consultations and advice at the below number and email address. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Next, we'll hear from Geoff Morgan. And keep submitting your Q&A in the Q&A tool. Thanks.
You're muted, Geoff.
Yeah, I'm unmuted now, Tom. All right, here we go. So just gonna go ahead and get this started. Can everyone see that beautiful picture of one of our communities? Hopefully you can.
Yep, you're good.
Great. Okay, so I'm Geoff Morgan. I'm the president of First Community Housing. We are developers of affordable housing. And what I want to talk about today is how, you know, in our current environment, we're seeing an evolution of living and working, especially with our low-income communities, and how that impacts our community within itself, but also the surrounding Bay Area. So here's a little bit about who we are. We've been working, we're based in San Jose. We serve, as it says, in the region of the biggest housing crisis nationally. We are a victim of our own success, if you will. We currently have 21 properties. I serve roughly, actually 4,000 residents. We've grown over time. So we have a pretty rich pipeline. We're very interested in environmental sustainability. You'll see in this map that we have about 20 properties. Well, 80% of our communities are concentrated in San Jose and the Silicon Valley, and that's pretty much where we are. We're a local nonprofit serving low-income households. We win a lot of awards. We do that because we believe that the building permit is the lowest standard for what you do to construct a building, and we think there's a lot of importance around being very thoughtful in the way we plan. You know, one of the things I noticed, I've worked as a project manager at First Community Housing back in 2002 to about 2009. Then the housing crisis hit. I moved into being a VP of real estate development. Then I came back. And when I came back in 2015 to lead the organization, this is what I found. Here's an article about police that are camped out in the parking lot of the San Jose Police Department because they simply have to drive so far to get to where they work that they really would rather live in the parking lot. And you can see in San Francisco, wait staff not available. So it's serve yourself. What I'm trying to point out here is when we get to a moment when essential services in major urban areas are no longer available because we can't have a diverse population in terms of the economy, that has effects on the ability to live, work effectively. We have to have essential services. So this is a way that the community I serve intersects with the live, work economy. The other thing that we do is we correct a lot of systemic racism. We've been hearing a lot about the murder of George Floyd. We've had statements of solidarity around Black Lives Matter. Our housing tends to help correct, we hope, that systemic racism. And Silicon Valley is one of the most diverse communities in the country. So when we are able to gather talent and increase innovation, I think we can do that better if we serve lots of different folks. So by virtue of the fact that we are correcting some housing inequalities and that creates actually more opportunity, and it creates opportunity for some of our residents, but it continues to allow this place to grow and thrive. If we have multiple bands woven together, all of us are stronger, we can all pull harder. And COVID-19 has had a very direct impact. You know, we are seeing that with our communities. We've kind of held our breath so far. We've had only about 9% or less of our residents who haven't paid rent. I think that's because they know eventually they will have to pay it back anyway, just based on the current laws. We obviously have to keep our programs going. But look at the impacts. And this is obvious from what everyone's dealing with every day. The fact that we have these jobs that have been cut back has necessitated major changes in people's lives. What we've tried to do is help those changes. But first of all, First Community Housing is the largest purchaser of what they call smart passes. Those are the passes for the Santa Clara Valley Transit Authority. So we're trying to reverse the cycle of poverty by allowing people not to spend $5,000 to $10,000 a year on a vehicle, because I don't think we can pave our way out of the housing crisis. If live work has an impact around reducing carbon footprint, and I think we can all agree it does, we're trying to also make sure that our residents can participate in the transit infrastructure such as it is. That's been a big threat recently because of COVID-19. We want to keep up that transit ridership, but we have to do it in a safe way. And meanwhile, transit agencies have been struggling and had to have legislative issues to kind of, initiatives just to keep them going. We've also expanded, if you can see that really cute boy who's probably a lot older and taller now, but we have a major program in terms of our food nutrition. We, as a result of COVID-19, have tried to keep people safe by delivering fresh fruit and vegetables from Second Harvest Food Bank to many of our residents. And we're also working with some of the most socially isolated people. We just heard Tom talk about isolation. Imagine what it's like if you don't even have access to the internet. We've been upping our speeds times 10 with the cooperation of some of our service providers, not only for some of our residents who do work from home, but also for future work from home residents, people that are kids who need to be at school, they need to be at school at home. And the only way to do that is to make sure they have excellent digital access. And so the program you see here is a chance for people to do a bit of sweat equity where they get a tablet in exchange for completing a course. And for many folks that have suffered mental illness or homelessness, this may be one of something they can grasp onto is, hey, I've done a great accomplishment today, and it's something that has a real impact in terms of connection. Healthy food access promotes live work. This is another example of it. You can see some of our folks packing vegetables at Second Harvest and bringing them to our communities. Below is a mobile, is essentially a mobile farmers market that we have going out to some of our communities as well. But in the midst of COVID, we don't have, as we're all careful about our sense of community, but the planter beds that you see are something that are very prominent. And so we're teaching people about nutrition. When this is over, those beds are a way for people to get to know each other, to go outside and learn how to be healthier. One of the things that when I first started, I think things happened for a reason. I came back to First Community Housing at the moment when the Jungle, which was at the time the largest homeless encampment in America, documented encampment, was just being cleaned up. And it was a source of embarrassment and shame. It was just embarrassment for the county and city of San Jose and for all of us, really. So we saw those impacts really highlighted as we cleaned up this area just south of the zoo in San Jose on Story Road. So Destination Home documented that it costs, if you have 7,000 homeless, 2,800 chronically homeless, this means they were homeless for over a year in a 3-year period, cost $520 million. We were paying $70,000 a year not to house people. This has major impacts on our services. It's a health crisis and it's an environmental crisis for us. This is not helpful. So we responded. We had just come out of the Great Recession. There was a big move to try and address this issue, and as a result, we created Second Street Studios, the first 100% dedicated to serving the formerly chronically homeless, permanent supportive housing with services in San Jose. So we had a place that concentrated services. We have about a 1 to 10 ratio of medical care, coordination of services, activities for 155 residents. And this community was also modular built. So we talked about containers. We actually shipped pieces of this building over to build it faster. So we created the upper structure. It went from 1 story to 5 stories in 2.5 weeks. So we needed to do this quickly. And one of the quotes I love personally is a person said, "Hey, you saved my life." So we think that this housing not only transformed lives, but saved it. In terms of live work, this has a lower commercial space. So this is like a live near work. It has a main street, if you will, a grand entrance at one side just to the south of this picture, which serves services and medical for our residents. But it's a place to concentrate. A lot of the things people did when they first came here after taking a shower and cleaning up was apply for a job. And a lot of people applied for medical care. So these are the things that reduce the frictions in a live-work economy and make an urban area safe for people to live and make them thrive. And this helps people to reintroduce themselves to the world. And in this building, there are people living the live-work economy in the Silicon Valley. We have other examples of that. These are a couple of mixed-use communities we have in Salinas. The one to the left is Gish Apartments, which is retail above 35 units, serves the developmentally disabled right next to the Gish Light Rail Station in San Jose. It's actually one of the busiest convenience stores on the West Coast per square foot. And below you see Villa Montgomery, which is a mixed-use community. We have residents working in those retail spaces that live up above. So that's a live near work situation. And we continue to grow. So you may have seen recently, we are in the midst of getting building permits and financing this building on DuPont Avenue right near Diridon Station. This is within a quarter mile, within easy walking distance of what's being touted as what will be the Grand Central Station of the West Coast. We're going to have families and we're going to have workforce housing, 365 units on 1 acre. We're building a makerspace. The plan is that Google has done a major effort to finance $29 million of investment towards the design, acquisition, and pre-development in cooperation with the Housing Trust of Silicon Valley. That makerspace is going to be a place for coding academies. It's going to be a place for people that are in our communities to connect with each other, to grow, to learn, and to be very, very close to where the high-tech jobs are, so that we hope to reverse some of the gentrification that's happening right now in the Silicon Valley and giving people a place where they can economically find ways to work. As you know, the high-tech folks are really taking live work seriously now in the age of COVID. I think this will help. And we have other programs. We work with the developmentally disabled. We work with digital literacy programs. So here at Los Esteros, we have kids that are in a digital literacy training program where they learned how to code at one of our communities that's on North Oakland Road. We have more coming. So just to say, the low-income housing community is a part of this digital economy. It is a part of the live-work economy, and we're really grateful to be able to serve in the area. And I think there's a lot more work to be done. So I think hopefully you can see that there's a big connection between a thriving live work and really serving those that are the least of these and helping them be a part of it. And that is my presentation. I have a few chats. Are we taking these afterwards, or should I try and answer some of these questions?
I think we'll try and take them all at the end in aggregate.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Geoff.
I'll unshare.
Next up will be Rick.
All right, good morning. So I think, this morning's conversation is a really excellent one, looking at the relationships between living and working in urbanized areas as we move forward. A lot of different perspectives and viewpoints on where some of the challenges and opportunities lie. I think the overarching rubric, and certainly through the AIA, has been a focus on more equitable communities. And I think living and working and re-examining those relationships from a design perspective is going to be fundamental to the future of urbanized areas, especially. And, you know, equity comes in all kinds of forms. Certainly access is prime, you know, making sure it's accessible to all individuals and all individuals of different mobilities and in backgrounds, but I think also equity in terms of looking at climate and the environment, flexibility through lifestyle diversity, hopefully economic aspects to how we make cities where there's greater inclusion in participating in the economy and in wealth building, and then finally through looking at it from a health and wellness lens. So moving forward, I think, you know, as cities become more dense, as housing continues to get built, the streets themselves start to become our living spaces. And how we think about streets as transformable over time, as the reliance on cars start to change, but still providing access for emergency services and cars, but really starting to shift that percentage of the urban realm and thinking about it in a different way. And making sure that outdoor spaces in particular that are being lost in new housing are still integrated into neighborhoods, whether it's through pocket spaces or rethought other types of public spaces, but spaces that are safe and secure and accessible as part of that living and working relationship changing. And also understanding the gaps that live and work design solutions can start to fill. You know, every community will tell you they want a walkable community. They want something that goods and services are in close proximity. Yet the housing we build is not aligned with that in many cases. So even as we build numerous housing units, it still necessitates someone to get on transit or in their car to go buy a loaf of bread, for example, or, you know, access goods and services that typically are local, I should say. So I think thinking through going forward how to fill the gaps with live and live design is essential. And particularly with small business now, our economy is fundamentally built around small businesses, and the work aspect has tremendous potential when we combine it with living to still ensure those walkability and health and safety and wellness kind of goals. So right now, if we look at how much of the housing is being built, especially our dense urbanized housing, it's through venture capital, REITs, hedge fund driven projects. The overwhelming majority outside of the 100% affordable projects are done in this way. And these are individuals of the highest wealth of our society pooling their wealth to buy land and build the housing. And what we're seeing is that through this process, one, the affordable housing that's getting built within it is in the 10 to 20% of the total project range. And if we just do simple math in the state of California and the need for affordable housing, this method would necessitate anywhere from upwards of 10 to 12 million units that would have to be built through this mechanism in order to get the affordable units that are documented as being needed. And that's not even to say when we achieve that, what new numbers might be there. So the first thing to think about is how live and work can open the doors to other individuals beyond that top 1% to participate in wealth building. And that's always been, you know, the aspirations from a class standpoint is you know, to have a family structure that allows for some wealth building that could be passed on perhaps. And so I think there are other ways to think about it in terms of land use and how we integrate live and work both in commercial and residential zoning districts. So one opportunity is not a new idea. Certainly, if we go back to many European and South American cities, wealth building has always been through a little slice of the pie, a small parcel of land that a family would buy and they would own. And over time, if their family grew, they might be able to expand to that second parcel. So on the right, a typical high density sort of living and working situation, oftentimes where the family would operate a ground floor space. On the left is an image from an architect, Brian Church, in the San Diego County area, where he was exploring, a similar type of idea, subdividing a commercial parcel into vertical slices with the intent of creating live-work units. Unfortunately, the local code didn't allow this. And so when it was finally constructed, it was forced into a mixed use situation where the ground floor was separated from the upper floor. There was no opportunity for individual ownership. And so this is fundamentally one of the problems, is that our building codes and our local zoning and municipal codes are not in alignment. And so even when we talk about live work opportunities, there's a great deal of work to be done just on the planning and the legislative side to put things in alignment. But there's a tremendous possibility if we really think about how, in particular, live-work subdivisions might work extremely well to create much more density and much more vibrancy, but also that wealth building capacity where little slices of the pie can be divided up individually and give more people a chance to participate in the economy. So from an urban design strategy, it's something I've been very interested in. I actually purchased a small little slice of a commercial strip, and I transformed it with great difficulty, I might add, through the building department, into a live-work duplex project. So I took a commercial space and now created 2 living units. The image on the left being the original, the image on the right, in each case, the transformed new space. And this form of housing has potential to deal with environmental considerations, the flexibility I mentioned, maintain a vibrant storefront. So you have a pedestrian-oriented type of economy that doesn't change, and that participation that I mentioned previously. So in addition to the wealth building capacity, I think when we talk about density, I've found now working for the city in a government capacity that we're not going to get to where we need to go by just talking about density. I think that's an old idea. And in fact, what we really should be talking about is socioeconomic intensity. So as cities start to grow and become more intense with housing, what is put into place alongside of that in terms of goods and services? The other types of equity that I was talking about earlier in terms of environment and health and wellness. So I think I'm more interested in that conversation going forward. One of the ways to do that in terms of density and intensity is to think about how different scenarios play out in a particular high density situation. On the left are some projects going back to the 20s, in Russia. There was a great interest, obviously, to house its growing population in high density housing situations. And they explored a number of sort of interlocking type of townhome configurations. Le Corbusier picked that up in the 1940s. He's obviously more famous for doing this, I was really interested in how that evolves into the 21st century. Did some studies and ended up with a project where we had a high density solution that got circulation down from the typical, range of 10 to 16% down to 4% circulation. So 96% of the building is now occupiable. And what that does is it creates different scenarios with the center section of this particular building, it ended up being an interlocking exploration where the workspace could be on a separate level from the live space. And so someone could effectively work from home and not have all the commotion of the normal live day of, normal activity if there's kids or other activity in the house, phones ringing, etc. You have a devoted workspace. And I think that devoted workspace is something that is going to be really important moving forward. One of the things we've been looking at in our urban design and architecture studio is how we can encourage home office or home occupation types of live and work relationships to be integrated into new housing in a thoughtful way. Unfortunately, what we see a lot are just, typical 2-bedroom units that you would have seen in the 1980s or 1990s. And the developer or architect just writes the word work in one of the bedrooms and calls it a workspace. I think as a design community, we can do a lot better as we get more compact. How do we actually accommodate reasonable living scenarios, but also provide a dedicated space that can be closed off? You have your Zoom calls, your telecommuting, all your work life in a space integrated within the unit. In the space on the right in particular, the compact studio concept does precisely that. But what it also does is addresses the affordability that Geoff was talking about, where you have a compact living unit that in order to move in, you only need to buy one piece of furniture effectively. In this case, it would be a sofa bed, could be a Murphy bed situation, other ways. But when we talk about living and working and affordability, we also have to look at what it takes even to occupy the space and how much it's going to take to transform it. So we've also been looking at now going back to high density situations and sort of attacking the challenges of the double loaded corridor scenario, where generally there's only one exposure to the outside world. And how do you start integrating home office types of high density situations that are environmentally responsive, that have light and air, and address that health and wellness issue. And the last point I was going to make is specifically about the sustainable aspects and where this could go if, as urban design proposals move forward. So if we were to think about how live work can be a part of not only sustainable solutions, but more restorative and regenerative solutions that actually make the environment better because of this relationship. So units that are more performance oriented or scenarios that are more environmentally responsive, that perhaps are biophilic and take into account the local microclimate and how to embrace nature. And then, as I mentioned, kind of move the bar from conventional design and past regular green and sustainable strategies, but move into more restorative and regenerative ideas. So how that might happen, as an example, are if we look at, typical spaces in urbanized areas, in this case, alleys that are thought of as sort of non-desirable abandoned spaces for trash collection and dumping of things. But perhaps if even a space like an alley were rethought, if it were part of an economy, a live and work economy that was introduced into that setting, and that going from the image on the left to the image on the right, by attacking the zoning and how we zone cities, looking at in particular that space between commercial and residential districts as a possible overlay zone for live work. Live work is the perfect transition from commercial to residential because it is both. It is a hybrid, right? And so if we were to take merely that alley space with the red line in the middle of the diagram there, and create an overlay zone right adjacent to it, and started thinking about using that wealth building idea, that subdivision idea, where you divide it into slices of bread and you transform the alley into an ecosystem that deals with stormwater and planting and urban wildlife. The potential is great to add tremendous amount of housing in a lower scaled that missing middle workforce range that does all the things that we aspire to do in terms of equity, access, a vibrant local economy where the workspace on the ground level can actually serve the neighborhood in a walkable way, walk-up spaces. And now we transform what would have been abandoned into something very vibrant just by rethinking creatively the live and work relationships. So thank you very much. I will stop share here.
Thanks, Rick.
Take it away, Adrianne.
Yeah, thank you. Next person, Jonathan.
Thank you. Good morning. Wow, that was very, very wonderful to see the three presentations prior to that. Great minds and great information. So thank you for including me in this. I'm a little bit different than the other group in that I have no clients. We are the developers, the architects, the owners. We have no investors, and we do the property management when we're done. And I did like the term missing middle because I think that's where we filled the voids over the last 30 years. I think, you know, I'm not a big green architect, but I believe that we are a great green architect in the sense that we create green lifestyle versus green architecture. And I'll go into that right at the end there. We create prototypes. We created 30 buildings over the last 30 years. We build 1 building a year. We integrate low income into every single project that we do. We get a benefit from it because we get to get out of jail on several different aspects as densities and height and setbacks and so forth. So it's a benefit to everybody, which is really important. We've always lived over the store. So we've lived that lifestyle that I'll talk about in the end. And I do believe the last point about home ownership, sharing the wealth is extremely important. So just developing affordable housing for people to rent is not actually, I think, the best way to go. It's just one way to go. So next slide, please. We moved into San Diego, my wife and I, 30 years ago. We worked for 2 firms for 2 years each, and then we built this small project called 7 on Kettner. And this is San Diego back in 1989. And next slide, please. The first thing that we did was create our own home on the end here. And this is our live work. This space below here is actually our offices. This is our living level, the 2 children's rooms. And then this is our bedroom upstairs here. And then we had 6 other units, because this is 7 on Kettner, by which we started to understand that the 3 to 4 to 5 over 1 prototype that San Diego's doing wasn't so good. Next slide, please. So when we created these entries that you would actually come off the street, this is back in '89 now. There's our front door, but you could walk downstairs here into our work unit. So it was separated, and we've done this over the last 30 years. Next slide, please. In developing different types of prototypes. So that was a condominium, which is a bad word because everybody gets sued there. This is fee simple. So we took a 100-foot lot by 50-foot deep, and we created 1, 2, 3 buildings. This is on a 25-foot by 25-foot lot here. There is a workspace down here, and you live above. This is convertible housing that I'll talk about in a moment. And then this is our house. This is the entry into the office here. This is the entry into the main residence. And then this is a window, next slide please, looking actually into our office. So we're trying to activate the street. Again, these are prototypes that no one is even thinking about in San Diego. But hopefully by the demonstration that we've done, next slide please, we actually inspire people to do other things. So we moved away from the condominiums, we moved into fee simple. So this is actually a property line here and a property line here. There's a 4-inch airspace. And this is what I call convertible housing. We did this back in 98, I believe, whereby this is a 2-bedroom row house here. It's 15.6 wide. It goes back about 70 feet. There's a garden in the back. And then some of them actually, this is the garage here. We took the garage door out and we put a live work space, commercial space down here that the unit above could grow into. Then in addition, there in the back was a granny flat on top of a single garage. So what I call a convertible housing. This person here could have come in, borrowed the money from their parents for the down payment, rented this space out initially, rented the granny flat out initially, and actually paid for the mortgage for their space above. And then when they were, let's say, an architect, they worked for a firm, they wanted to go on their own, they could move down here, they could push out the tenant, they could make their own space, claim the street, activate the street on their own. And this is that sort of that ownership that was spoken about. Next slide, please. So then we had to deal with the notion of the car, and the car is extremely important to me. I collect cars, but I also am an anti-car person because we've lived and worked above the store for these last 30 years. So the banker was saying, listen, you know, we're not going to finance, back in 98, we're not going to finance anything that doesn't have 2-car parking. And I said, well, if I can provide you 2-car parking in any way, shape, or form, would you buy that? She says, absolutely. So next slide, please. Next slide, we provided a parking space here, next slide. And then we stacked the 2 cars on it. Not a novel idea, but it worked. And next slide, please. The banker then financed the project. So living above the store, our daughter has dyslexia, so we had to move out of downtown because there wasn't any housing that had schools that went with it. So we built this project here. This is called the Prospect. And the notion here was to have the live upstairs and the work downstairs. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, if you see here, this is a sheet of glass that we basically shoved the work into the garage and into the basement. This was an old gas station site here. This is 10 feet wide and 40 feet deep. Next slide, please. And you'll see this was basically the lid on top of our office. So we truly were, again, still living above the store. Next slide, please. And you can see down here, that's my chair. And there were other spaces down here for that. The relationship was a little too close. You could look right down into it. So we decided, next slide, please, to go back downtown. And with that, this is called the Continental. This is the last project that we just completed. This is 42 units, of which 8 are affordable housing. But the true term affordable applies specifically to the entire building here, in that our idea was to completely eliminate the car in San Diego so that people could save $500–600 a month on car payments, lease payments, insurance payments, and they could live in these units. So if we didn't have to build all this parking below this for these 42 units, which is 600 dwelling units an acre at 350 square feet each, plus the outdoor balcony, they could actually have a better lifestyle. These units range in San Diego, which is very inexpensive, $1,500 to $1,700 a month for these spaces here. And then these people here could actually walk, live, work 2 blocks away at one of the facilities, of restaurants or what have you, but it's a walking lifestyle. Our son, Matthew, went to USC. He graduated 10 years ago, and now he's built this house. This is the Cube. This is his own single family house that he now has a child with his wife. And then she has this store called Remedy, which is like a pharmacy downstairs. So they're now, you know, continuing the legacy of living above the store. I'd like to do a little math for you here and talk about the last 30 years of my life. So let's say that 50 weeks a year I worked, and 2 weeks I took off. So 50 weeks a year I didn't drive 1 hour a day back and forth to my work. That's 1,500 hours, which is actually 62 physical days. It's basically 2 months. So I've lived actually 2 months longer than anybody that's listening to me now in quantum physics, because I didn't drive a car. If you start putting like a dollar math to that, that's 1,500 hours. And let's say you only bill $150 an hour, that's $250,000. And I know all you guys in architecture here got a great education on economics, so you know the theory of 72, which means that if you take an interest rate divided into 72, that will tell you how quickly that your money will double. So in that time frame, the money actually went from $225,000 at 4% to $675,000. So now I have 2 months extra of my life. I have $675,000 in the bank for billing. And then I didn't drive a car. So the car didn't pollute. It didn't drive 90,000 miles. It didn't get 25 miles a gallon, which sucked down 3,600 gallons of gas, which basically cost me $10,000. And effectively that car was $120,000 over this time frame. So if you took that to this theory of 72, again, you're close to $900,000 I've saved. That's integrating, you know, the wealth factor in there. And then I've just gained, you know, 2 months of my life. So I think it's extremely important that we understand it's a lifestyle thing. And I think it's been presented such that is really the driving force between how our world is going to change and how our world is going to not change. The most important thing for me is the climate change. going forward in our world and how we're going to deal with it. And then secondarily, off subject here is also our national debt. And I have no idea why the government can't go and put 50-year bonds out right now and finance our debt. So if you look at inflation, we'll inflate out of our debt. Otherwise, we're going to have much bigger disasters coming our way relative to affording anything, let alone affordable housing. So I think I quickly got through my presentation, and I thank you again.
Thanks, Jonathan. I have just a couple of closing thoughts, and then we'll open it up for Q&A, and hopefully my closing thoughts are going to tie all of these presentations together. Hillary, you have my presentation, yes?
Yeah, hold on just a second. I'll pull it up.
Okay. Thank you. So we can go to the first slide. So many of the panelists talked about live, work, and work, live having a history throughout the developed world, springing up as makeshift or permanent, but often necessary spaces that establish economic independence. And what we've been talking about today is not new, and nor is it always governed by regulations and codes. Around the world, what we try to codify as live work is manifest economic independence and mobility for working class and poor people, as well as artists and makers. These live work spaces can be seen as retrofitted into single family neighborhoods or warehouses, offices and retail spaces, or they could be purpose built in commercial districts and large urban infill residential buildings. And it's in these purpose built spaces that become regulated with specific percentages that must be dedicated to work and are more often for this creative class, with professional services being the work rather than the historical making or production, distribution, and repair. They all have opportunities as well as challenges based depending on their location. And then so a few examples from FAIA Talk's work in the East Bay. Next slide. Hisman-Hinu Terrace in Oakland, California was 92 units of affordable family housing. And then there was also a community marketplace and 9 vendor stalls. It's located on International Boulevard, which is a critical commercial corridor in Oakland. The intention was never actually for the residents to also work in the marketplace or become vendors, and although that was certainly possible. And unfortunately, the street vending never really established a firm hold in the retail landscape due to that limited foot traffic in this part of International Boulevard. But the notion was there, and it is about the interweaving of commercial and residential spaces, as Rick was starting to get into. Next. Swan's Marketplace, and of course, it's not only about new construction. We can integrate living and working spaces in the case of Swan's through rehabilitation. This is of an existing market hall into affordable housing and actually co-housing, retail and office, as well as live workspaces. The live workspaces, as Tom was getting into, are fed by the foot traffic of the housing above and co-located with other retail. That intermixing space of the courtyard further supports the workspaces. And it's really hoping to resolve the challenge that was presented for the Hisman-Hinu vendor stalls by providing that intermixing and social activity on the ground floor. Next. So here you can see the co-housing on the upper floor, the affordable units, and then the commercial retail spaces on the second floors. Next. A section through the Swans Marketplace building, so garage parking for the residential uses, again, the co-housing, but could also, and live workspaces on the upper floors. Next. Gateway Commons is an example of purpose-built housing for artists with spaces that meet the needs of large format or messy work with high ceilings and durable finishes, not part of a larger multifamily development. In this instance, in Emeryville, arranged in a 3-story townhouse configuration on a vehicular muse. Next. Unit type A with a garage and workspace on the ground floor. The workspace entered from the street. So really can be dedicated workspace. Living in kitchen on the 2nd floor and sleeping on the 3rd floor. So this is really sort of live near work, not living in the work. Hit forward. So some views of the interiors of those spaces. Next. Similar layout with, but a slightly different configuration, different components. Again, public entries on the street and private entries through the parking. So that these commercial and residential uses are separated, but co-located. Next, 901 Jefferson is a little bit more contemporary example. It is exemplified by the development of the South of Market in San Francisco in the 90s, this time in downtown Oakland. Responding to the zoning requirements for active ground floor uses, this happens to be about 1 block away from Swan's Marketplace that I showed about a minute ago, but that's far enough away that it doesn't have the typical retail foot traffic. Originally built for condo ownership, there are 9 ground floor lofts and a corner retail space. That corner retail space never had a tenant in the 12 years that it's been finished. The loft units were designed with ground floor landscape screening, sort of presuming that they would never be viable commercial businesses and would need to be primarily live spaces. However, a similar format, large multifamily development with ground floor loft live work, 1 block closer to Swan's, was actually built a few years earlier than this, did have viable ground floor businesses in their live work units, but mostly knowledge workers, not makers. Next. So here are those ground floor live work loft entrances, the smaller picture up top right after construction, and the lower image, a more recent photo in the last year or so. Student housing actually can also provide us some interesting lessons for live work and work live lifestyles, particularly applicable to the current pandemic forces on housing in cities, driving up desire for dedicated workspaces within dwelling units, as Rick was getting into. In student housing, students live and study in their monk-like spaces. In their ideal forms, they have dedicated space for living and dedicated space for the work of students, the studying and learning. But of course, these typologies can intermix, such as this project in Berkeley, near UC Berkeley, which has a dedicated group project or conferencing space in the ground floor and on the top floor, as well as independently accessed live workspaces at the street. And again, as Rick presented and Tom and others, the components of work-live are present. A minimum and conflicting maximum between the zoning and building code definitions for live and work, durable materials, durable finished materials, large openings for large format works to be brought in and out of the work zones. More typical student housing, if you go to the next page, can also have study or workspaces with an impact on the design of housing without becoming lofts, whether that's providing an alcove or a small 60 to 80 square foot workspace or dedicated workspace within a unit, such as we see in Lenny Madam Stacy's building for CCA Blattner Hall on the left, or in desk alcoves like graduate student housing floor plan that I'm showing here. As architects of multifamily housing at Piatak, we're seeing more and more co-working and conferencing spaces offered as building amenities in large multifamily developments, in addition to better internet and bonus spaces that can be offices for stay-at-home workers. So it's becoming not a zero commute, but commute distances that get measured in feet rather than miles. I think you can go to the next one. So thank you, that's all I'm going to talk about. I want to open it up for Q&A so that we've got about 15 minutes for Q&A. As you've seen through this morning's presentations, the concept of live work and work live manifest in a variety of typologies with complicated approvals and jurisdictions and ramifications for the way that we engage our urban environment as residents and workers. I want to thank you for this time this morning, and we'll open up for conversation with the Q&A. Please use the Q&A feature to ask questions, and we'll feed them to our panelists. Thanks. So the first question that I want to put out there is from Phil Bona. How are cities appraising the live and work portions of these properties, especially converting existing commercial buildings and adding the live portion? I don't know if Rick or Jonathan want to take a stab at that.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm sure Jonathan has a take on it as well. I know I went through this directly with the project I did. And frankly, it's a disaster. Appraisers don't know what to do with it. Generally, appraisers work off of comps. And if there aren't any comps that they can find, they have a hard time assessing value when it comes to live work. Beyond that, there's other issues. I know in our county, in LA County, our assessor didn't even have a code for this type of use. So from a taxation standpoint, it's really messed up as well, because they don't know whether to define it as commercial or residential. In my case, I had a residential use in a commercial zone, and they were completely messed up by that. So in the end, at my encouragement, LA County now created a brand new live and work code for the county assessor, and they're in the process of cleaning it up. Maybe Jonathan can elaborate on his end.
My last 30 years has been a complete nightmare, because we've always done the project that no one else has done, so there's never a comp. So what you start to do is you don't call it live work, you just call it residential, and then you apply in a note that's a bedroom or what have you. You just sort of have to do that until they start getting some momentum. They still don't know what they're doing. I mean, the appraisers will value better architecture over lesser. It's all about square footage, and where, let me look behind me and see what you get. So it's a nightmare. You're absolutely right. I can't believe the residential and the commercial area for you. That was brutal. I don't know how you got through that.
This question for Tom. How do you prevent live work spaces from poaching the living space for all workspace? So for example, a tech entrepreneur might take a live work unit and turn the live into entirely workspace.
You're muted, Tom.
Take two. I don't think you do prevent it. Basically, one of the most important signal qualities of live work is that it's flexible. And that unit may be all work, it may be all live, and it may be live and work over time. It's going to shift, and it's a building that learns.
If I could chime in, you're absolutely right with that, Tom. We had a building we just completed. It was 56 units, and one person actually rented a unit in the building, and then they rented a separate unit in the building as their offices. So they were just making that dynamic there. And I think that's just the way it goes. You have to be able to let people do what they want in their spaces, and just let it happen organically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that as planners or as planning officials, we get to tell people how they're going to use their spaces is, to me, a bit obsolete.
Well, I would say there is another aspect to this, now being on the city side, having been in private practice for 30 years, and that is you have to look at the implications of things. And if live work by code allows for 5 employees, and you have a 10-unit building that people are living in, and all of a sudden the potential is for 40 employees to be in that building, that has an impact, right? And that has an impact to quality of life and other things. So I'm all for flexibility. I'm all for transformation over time, but it has to be within an understanding that live and work sometimes are complementary and sometimes they're in conflict, and good design has to address this.
Yeah, Rick, that's an interesting question. I was just thinking about zoning in places like Houston, where they allow uses next to each other that other cities deem incompatible. What are your thoughts on on that?
Oh, I think we need to experiment far more with uses that were once thought incompatible because they were the result of sort of left brain two-dimensional thinking, you know, that on a map you put a commercial zone here and a residential zone there and you can't intermingle them. And I think what's interesting right now is we're opening the door to questioning that and understanding that there's three-dimensional relationships in cities, especially as we get more dense. So I think the blend is important and necessary, but we also have a certain responsibility and not just build boxes and say people can fill them up any way they want without implication, you know, without repercussions. So, you know, it's finding that middle ground of encouraging and fostering diverse relationships and flexibility, but having other design amenities or social spaces or public spaces integrated so that things are buffered and encouraged.
Adrianne, on that note, one of the greatest opportunities we're going to start seeing probably spring to fall of next year is the demise of these office buildings, smaller office buildings that are going to start to go back to the banks. Now that's going to be another brutal, going back to economics, a brutal thing on the economy. We're going to have to start funding all these losses. But I think, you know, my ultimate goal would be the city of San Diego to say, you know what, for 2 years, build anything you want, anywhere you want, just do it. Provide housing everywhere. And if they'll let us do that in these office buildings, you'll see a dramatic increase of housing supply, which, you know, directly reverts to the more supply you have, the less expensive it is. It's simple economics.
Well, sort of related to that, we have a question in the Q&A about asking us to address the issue of gentrification vis-a-vis the many chosen locations for the development of live-work projects. And I'll open that up to anybody who wants to take a stab at it.
Yeah, I'll take a quick stab at that one. I think for us, our core value is, you know, it's urbanist. I mean, we're essentially looking at trying to build in locations with great transit amenities, access to jobs, pretty straightforward concepts that I think everyone here is living by. And, you know, and I think now with some of the new legislation, at least from the entitlement side, it's actually getting easier to, you know, it used to be that we showed our excellent design, which we continue to do. And by the way, excellent design does not mean expensive design at all. I think you look at life cycle costs and other benefits around health for our residents, it is not expensive in that way. So we really pride ourselves on that. So yeah, I mean, we're trying to put people where the jobs are. And now I think finally the state's beginning to get it in that way. And so that's how we address gentrification. We address gentrification by creating housing for everyone, for folks that otherwise would be displaced. All the folks that we have in our communities, we're seeing after the floods in San Jose, it really exposed a kind of an ugly underbelly. We had, you know, 6 people or 2 or 3 families doubling up in rooms that were evacuated because of the floods. And when the community saw that, it became a lot easier for us to entitle new affordable housing there.
Yeah, I would say gentrification is a huge issue in you know, infill neighborhoods in particular. In our community, we're seeing say a 10-unit project that's existing, and let's say 5 or 6 of the units are currently occupied by what we would consider affordable or workforce families. That project is torn down, they're displaced, and in their place we'll get, say, 16 units. Out of those 16 units, 3 must be affordable. So now we have 5 or 6 displaced families, and we've created 3 affordable new units. And those statistics get reported as creating 3 new units, but the 5 or 6 displaced individuals are not accounted for. And I think that's a huge issue that I've raised with HCD in Sacramento. And I've said, are you accounting for the displacement? Because that is part of the conversation. If we're putting 3 families on the street to create 3 affordable units, you know, are we really moving the needle? And I think that's a huge issue that needs to be talked about far greater.
Interesting.
Yeah, I see Tom raising his hand.
Well, I'm going to sort of slightly take a different angle on it. Since I founded a nonprofit after the Ghost Ship fire called Safer DIY Spaces. And in the ensuing 4 years, we have stabilized 1 million square feet of affordable, naturally occurring, affordable, quasi-legal live work at a cost of 50 cents a square foot. That's not to legalize it, that's to stabilize it. We're working on code reform to make legalizing it less expensive. We think we're going to bring it down to about $50. But that is another way to come at it. You know, these are low-income artists and makers and people who are living marginally, and they're still there. And that's a way to address gentrification, is to say, you get to stay. And these are spaces that are typically communal, with communal kitchens and maybe anywhere from 5 to 20 people. And they're not typically going to be yuppified. It just isn't. It isn't a way of living that somebody who works downtown is going to want.
Yeah, and so maybe a building on that is a question from William Wright in the Q&A. Are local municipalities in California looking to expand adaptive reuse to allow more integration of living in office spaces and commercial spaces or multi-use buildings, rather than simply adding live-work opportunities to residential districts? Anybody have thoughts on that?
No in San Diego,
No in San Diego?
not a chance. We're not very forward thinking here. We're reactionary.
So, Jonathan, in San Diego, is it true that residential is not typically allowed in commercial zones?
Typically, it's zoned the way it's zoned. Then you have to go through a monster project to get something rezoned. Back to my whole notion, just give everybody 2 years to be able to build wherever you want, whatever you want. And the forward thinking's not there. We have a new mayor, Todd Gloria, who's very progressive, so it may change. But the problem is these time frames are so small. You know, we need to do it now. We don't need to do it in 2 or 3 years when the economy takes a huge dump.
Right.
Money to do it, right? So now get it while it's hot. It's incredible what's going on properties. I can't find a property to do a high rise in downtown San Diego. Everything's being consumed. None of the deals make sense. There's just money flooding in that's going to just completely implode in 2 years. You wouldn't believe it. The deals do not make any sense. They're upside down going in. But
So Geoff, I think you're going to get the last word on this because then we need to wrap up for time.
Later on today, I'm going to be talking to a neighborhood that has a project. It's a hotel that's being converted to housing, permanent supportive housing for homeless, using the Home Key funds. And I love what Jonathan said about the notion of some of these office buildings. I think if the live work economy, if COVID does change ultimately the way we live and work, I think it's a great opportunity for us to really balance some major inequities that we have. The homelessness side is solvable. I think that live work is just good planning. It's the right thing to do if you think about it from an environmental standpoint. So that's what I have to say. I think there are things on the edges that are hopeful, and I hope they expand. And I think time will tell if the economy allows that.
Great.
Thank you, everyone, for very insightful, informative presentations. We look forward to continuing the conversation in future town halls. I think we have a whole series that could come right out of this morning. I would like to thank all of our speakers, Tom, John, Jeffrey, Rick, and Adrianne, and our members of our Urban Design Committee, Gwyn Pugh, Lee Lippert, Stephanie Reich, Nathan Ogle, Maria Ogridziak, Frank Fuller, and Chris Barkley, and of course, Mark Christian and Nikki Dennis Stevens of AIA California. I will encourage everyone, get involved politically, be a citizen architect like I am, go on a planning board, you get your say every 2 weeks. And remember, we will be submitting for learning units, and do follow up for future events at AIA California's website. And thank you, everyone. Be well and take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.